But to begin with, also next week, of course, next Thursday, it's Election Day here in the province of Ontario. And the leaders of Ontario's main political parties will be campaigning largely in the voter-rich Greater Toronto-Hamilton area over the next few days, right up until Election Day. Emily Javeski has details for us.
Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford, who's seeking to hold on to the Premier's office, will be speaking in Oakville today and is set to hold a rally in Kitchener tonight. NDP leader Andrea Horwath heads first to East Toronto, then to the Hamilton region, and later to Mississauga, with a stop in Paris, Ontario along the way. Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca will be in Mississauga to discuss his party's plan to oppose a new highway promised by the Tories before heading to Brampton. Green Party leader Mike Schreiner will be making a climate announcement in Hamilton before he also heads to Brampton. Ontario's election is set for June 2nd. Emily Javeski, The Canadian Press, Toronto.
So we're into the home stretch right now, and we want to talk about polling. We want to talk about voter turnout, which is always an issue in elections like this, and what they're saying and who's saying it. And to do that, pleased to welcome for our usual Friday session about Ontario politics, John Best, who is the publisher of the Bay Observer. John, pleasure to have you back on the program. Hope you're doing well these days.
I am. Good morning, Bill.
Good to see you and hear you again. As we head into this, the polling here is interesting, I find. Not unusual for an incumbent government, of course, to hold a lead. They do have a track record, and they did get elected with a huge majority. But this hasn't wavered much at all for the last little while. Even when, even the debate, of course, the English language debate a little while ago was had. That usually causes some kind of change. People impressed with one party leader and maybe not as impressed with something else, and you see a shift. But this 8 to 10 point lead that the PC seem to be enjoying right now has been pretty consistent, hasn't it?
It really has, and I think it's a function of the fact that, quite frankly, this has been kind of a boring election. People, I think, are preoccupied with so many things right now, and you've got this overriding COVID situation that, it really isn't at a crisis stage at this particular point, but people are thinking, the fact that the COVID is hopefully tamping down a little bit. People thoughts are turning to, holiday plans later this year. And it just, it's spring. I think people are, you just feel good because the weather is starting to get good. And I think those are all, if you're in an election mode, they're good distractions, but they are distractions.
There's another element to this, too. I can we even recall a conversation you and I had, it's about a year ago, and things were not going well, as you may recall. The Omicron wave and the numbers of hospitalizations, et cetera, et cetera. It was a pretty dire circumstance then. And the consensus among the political pundits and people that would call into the show, the voters, in other words, was, boy, we're not going to forget this wave, and we're not going to forget how Ford and the government reacted to this and the shutdowns and all this other stuff. I think they've forgotten. As you say, it's better than it was a year ago, but we're still in pandemic mode here. And it's not an issue in this election, and that's kind of surprising.
It's not an issue. They have forgotten. Well, they haven't forgotten, but they're not factoring into the election, their election intentions, at least according to the polls we're seeing. The other thing is, I think it would be hard to make a case that another political party would have done significantly better in handling the COVID. Not to say that there weren't mistakes, there weren't false steps along the way, but let's face it, not only the government of Ontario, but the world was really making this up as they went along. We started out with a disease we knew very little about, and for which there was absolutely no treatment, no vaccine. And we moved through that to a point where there was vaccine, and now there's even treatment. So it's, I think a voter looking at it would say, well, it wasn't perfect, but I don't think you can make political hay out of it, quite frankly.
Well, a year ago they wanted to. All three opposition parties, we were going to say they're going to hammer away at this. But you're right. As you and I talked about at that time, the stores are open again. We can go where we want. We can fly if we want, if you can afford it, and all this other stuff. And I agree with you. I don't think we've forgotten about it. I think right now, and we've had polling that indicates this right now, we're more worried about trying to live from day to day now. The cost of living has skyrocketed, and most economists that we talked to, none of them ever predicted things were going to be like this. I think a lot of us had the mindset that, you know what, once the doors are open again and the numbers start to go down, we're going to spend all that money that we haven't been able to spend for 2 years, and we're all going to live happily ever after. Nobody saw supply chain issues. Nobody talked about the cost of living and inflation, and we're right in the middle of that now.
Well, and also a war in Ukraine that has exacerbated both the supply chain issues, food shortages, all of that stemming from that conflict. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, things are tough and challenging, but it's hard. They're almost world events, and they don't really drill down to looking like they're Ontario government events. So there's stuff going on, but it seems to be the causes seem to be far away.
Let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen in the next few days. The clip we just played from Emily Javeski there, the leaders are going to spend a lot of time in southern Ontario, especially in the Toronto-Hamilton area. That includes Brampton and Mississauga, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is the voter rich. I think there's something like 50 or 60 seats, I guess, available in that whole area. Right. And that can turn an election in a heartbeat. I mean, you win that area, you win the election pretty much.
Yeah, and we're at the phase now in the campaign where you won't see leaders campaigning anywhere where they don't think they have a chance of winning. There'll be no drop-ins for candidates that are out of the race. So this is where we start seeing, where they really think their best chances lie. And no surprise that they're all going to stay in southern Ontario. Mike Schreiner has only once or twice ventured out of Guelph. He's got to keep that seat no matter what. He's trying to get somebody elected up in the Parry Sound area. But essentially, everybody's going to be sticking and shoring up. If they're within a couple of points, you're going to see them in those kind of ridings. And of course, you saw Doug Ford here last night. He was campaigning in Flamborough-Glanbrook, where they look like they're probably going to hold on to that seat. Hamilton East Stony Creek is a seat they have a shot at that they haven't had a shot at in 20 years. But you won't see him campaigning in Hamilton Centre for sure. So yeah, they're all shoring up where they think they can win now.
That's got to be kind of heart-wrenching for the candidates of all the political parties right now. If the leader kind of pretends you don't exist this final week, that means they think you got much of a shot at this, or you're home and cooled out. And I know there are some people in some of those ridings that are like that. But it's interesting, the political spin that gets put on this stuff, though. There's a story in the Toronto Star earlier this week that they found a leaked document that was basically the Liberal strategist saying, if we can still win this thing. We just have to win this. We have to do this. And now in today's paper, we're finding that the NDP have a similar situation that got leaked to the media. That, oh, no, we're still in play here. We can still form the government. We can still be the premier. Is that wishful thinking? Trying to buoy up the spirits of the people on the front lines right now to keep them going? Because they got a feeling, I would think, pretty disappointed when they look at the numbers here.
Yeah, I don't know if it's wishful thinking or if it's science fiction, but, it kind of surprised me to see Robert Benzie, somebody that's been around covering politics. I know he works for the Star, but, to take the bait on that, and the NDP doing a ditto on another leak poll today. We'll know soon enough, Bill, but if you're within 5 points, are you within striking distance? Yes, but do you have any momentum? Is the real issue, and I don't frankly see. I don't see anybody having much momentum. I mean, even Doug Ford is he looks like he's got roughly the polling numbers that he had going into the writ. So I don't see momentum really. In any of the parties, but certainly Del Duca, I don't see anything there, and not much, frankly, with Andrea either. In fairness to her, she was sidelined. She lost 5 or 6 days with COVID, which certainly didn't help. But to say that there's any kind of a surge going on anywhere, I don't see it.
And that's what we were looking for as well. That kind of kick right near the end there, and we saw that happen. When they booted David Peterson and Bob Rae won that election back in the early '90s. They were disenchanted with Peterson for a variety of reasons. They didn't want to go back to the Tories because they just booted them a little while before that. And I got to tell you, John, I was doing this job, of course, back in those days too, and we just noticed about 4 or 5 days before the election when we were kind of doing our informal polling, the consensus seemed to be, you know what, I'm sick of both those guys. I'm going to give the NDP a shot. And that kind of came out of the blue. And that party under Bob Rae, they put on the sprint there down the home stretch and came not way back, but I mean, they overtook everybody else and, of course, ended up with the government. I don't see that happening. You're right. I don't think anybody's got momentum right now because what the opposition players talk about, and I know Del Duke has mentioned this, and so has Horvath and Mike Schreiner, they wanted this to be a change election. In other words, we got to get those guys out of there. They've done a terrible job. Ontarians don't want to change government right now. They said, I guess we have to vote because it's time to. The time for this guy is up right now. But there's nothing there. There's nothing to say, yeah, there's no dynamic leader here that's going to capture people's imagination. There's no issue that people want to get their teeth into, except, as you said, the economic issues right now, which are real problems for an awful lot of people. But I think there's an understanding here that this is a global picture that we're dealing with, and they're not putting the finger of blame on anybody right now.
Well, and change elections don't normally happen at the end of a 4-year term. They typically, as they did in the last election, they happen at the end of a 13-year term where people are sick and tired simply from the familiarity aspect. So I think, and I don't say this in a partisan way, I think Ford surprised people. His first year was rough, and it looked like a kind of a Mike Harris thing. He fired his chief of staff, which pleased everybody inside the party and out. And then things seemed to turn around. Then COVID hit, and I think only the most jaded would say that he didn't rise to the occasion. He did grow in the job. He faced the challenge. And the one thing he displayed that Justin Trudeau and so many others struggle for is authenticity. He may not be the most slick individual, and he may need a 3-ring binder when he goes into a debate, but he's the only one of the 4 leaders that doesn't look like an idiot when he's wearing a hard hat and boots. And there's a sense of that going on. And when he says he cares, let's put it this way, he's more believable than most people in his role saying that. So,
well, the other story here, there's been some internal polling that's been leaked too that says within the NDP and Liberal parties, there's a great amount of unease about their leaders. And Del Duke is still relatively new, but the Liberals are kind of having, buyer's remorse on. And as we know, Andrea Horvath how many elections is this now?
4.
How much longer are they going to say, oh, well, we'll keep bucking along with what we got here? At some point, they got to say, maybe we need to move on here. And I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen, but there's a lot of rumblings there. People aren't doing it publicly, but we're hearing a lot of stories about that.
Well, I think the poll you're referring to is the one where even people that are intending to vote Liberal and NDP, when asked who do you think's going to win, they think that Ford's going to win.
Yeah.
And you don't need a PhD in political science. The polls have been saying that right from the get-go. Nothing much has changed. The debate didn't change anything. All the scandals that pop up normally in elections are the typical ones. Nobody, this business about using constituency money for clothing and personal expenses, everybody's in on that game. So it's really tough to make an issue out of it. And constituency money, by the way, is money that's donated. It's not typically government money. So that's not entirely true because they do get reimbursed a certain amount. But bottom line is every party does that, and that's the extent of the scandal. Bill, this election is so boring that we're not even getting the stories about people's signs being destroyed, because partly because I think just the population generally are really, I don't want to tell my neighbors who I'm voting for, and I think there's more and more of that.
Yeah, I've noticed driving around town, I don't see nearly as many lawn signs as we have in previous elections. So it's up to us now. I mean, it's the voters' turn now. You know, we got to turn out. Advanced polling, I think, ends in the next day or so, and then, of course, the election. And the numbers seem pretty strong here. So I'm sure we got lots to talk about next week on the program. As always, John, thanks so much for this, and have a great weekend, and we'll talk next Friday.
My pleasure, Bill.
Take care. John Best from the Bay Observer.